Our main issue with homebound learning is that some students will think they're done when they're not even really close. For some, you've never had an art class before, and this is your first one. And for others, you've had art before, but you don't have a teacher over your shoulder saying, oh, don't forget this, don't forget that. So this video is made as a reminder, something you should look at before you turn your work in. So I'm going to go through with a little video over my shoulder about my expectations, what it is that I'm looking for a work to be finished. And I'm addressing this to my high school students. So the first thing you're going to need is a drawing, a sketch. And we're going to have an assignment. It'll be given to you. And in my example here, it's going to be kind of cartoony because I kind of want to get through the main idea. But this would be appropriate for a portrait, a landscape, a drawing in your room, whatever it is that we're assigning you for homebound work. It's important to really push yourself all the way through the steps to make and create a fully finished, gradable, accessible work of art. So the first thing you need to do is look at your work and ask yourself, am I done yet? So how far have you gotten? So the main skill that we have for the lowest level is just a drawing. And sometimes it'll be done in pencil first, sometimes directly with pen. If you use pencil first, we don't want to see pencil in that final drawing. Unless it's a pencil drawing. But in most cases, you're going to be covering that up with pen, or we're going to be erasing it out. So if you see pencil in the final drawing, that's generally not a good thing in a high school class, unless it's a pencil subject that we're kind of working with. In most cases, if you're going for color, we don't want to see the original pencil in the final thing. So just a drawing is kindergarten level skills. We just have an object. There's no thought to the background or anything. It's just a simple basic drawing. This might be considered a sketch, but for high school level, it's kind of a low level sketch. It's just sort of a thumbnail, not even a sketch. So then we need to think about color. And the most elementary version of color is just coloring in with a single layer of color, just pulling the color right out of the crayon box or the color pencil box and using that one color, without regard to how colors actually are out in nature. So when you get that one color done, it looks very basic, it looks very simple, and maybe you haven't even addressed the background. That's what I would expect at about the kindergarten first grade level is, some basic color. Hopefully you're coloring inside the lines that you've created at least, but a single layer of color is not anywhere near complete for a high school student's work. We start moving up a little bit and get into second and third grade skills when we start to consider a background. Now this is a very basic background and we're coloring in all of the elements. But again, the background isn't fully formed. We don't get a real sense of space. We get a hint of it because there's a tree kind of included there and a hill underneath the feet. But that's kind of it. You'll notice nothing is overlapping. That's something we see in very low elementary students' work, that nothing overlaps. It's kind of like if I drew my hand and always draw it with the fingers out. There's none of this overlap happening that would be more sophisticated. Lower elementary kids tend to draw things that don't overlap. So we want to see something that kind of goes beyond that. But at least there's some addressing of the background. Again, now we're starting to see layering of colors. When you color in one direction, you'll want to color in the opposite direction to start to lay that color flat. If you want to be more sophisticated about your color use, you can use a neighboring color to color in, or just intensify the same color that's there, but go in an opposite direction. This will help make the colors lay flat and look more saturated, a little bit better than on a kindergarten level. Kindergartners don't generally overlap their colors, but in grade 3, we start to see that happen, and we start to see that even in some of our background elements. Now again, it doesn't have to be a different color, but we should see layering of colors so that we're canceling out all of those pencil strokes that we're seeing in our work. When we move to 4th and 5th grade sort of level work, we start to see a more resolved background. There's going to be some overlapping happening in the background. Now we're not afraid to show one finger in front of another, or a tree in front of a sign, or a figure in front of a horizon. We see that a horizon has been added to this, some mountains. We even have a little bit of the idea of perspective with the road that goes from small to large in the foreground. And again, everything is colored in with at least 2 layers of color, one color canceling out the other. Sometimes they're neighboring colors, which will add a sense of richness to the image, and sometimes it's a single color just canceled out, the pencil strokes being canceled out by going in the opposite direction. There's also this sense of shadow, and shadows can be done with a cool color. So if something is green, a cool color that's related to green would be blue. Some students jump right away to black, and I don't like seeing that in a final work. It shows somebody who's kind of naive about the ideas of color. So when you look at the shadows, try and avoid black. Use a cool color that's near to the color that you're using. It's okay to use a little black once in a while for shadows, but for the most part, you should try and avoid that. Black in shadows is not really natural. If I go to, let's say, a flea market, and I'm trying to buy a painting to invest in, but I don't know who the artist is, the first thing I do is I look at the shadows. And if the artist uses black in the shadows, I know that they're a student. They don't really know what it is that they're doing. But if I see colors in the shadows, I know that that person has had some kind of training in the arts. So I'm more interested in that particular piece, and I might buy it in order to invest in it or resell it to someone else. So using color in the shadows is definitely more professional than using black in the shadows. The only place we see black in nature is with charcoal. You're not really going to see it as a shadow under a tree or something like that. So try and avoid it. Unless you're doing a charcoal picture, then you have to use black because that's what you're using. So we're going to see some shadows with color in that stage. So this is grade 4 and 5, a little advanced, for the 5th grade, but it's certainly something that all high school students should be able to handle. The next step up from that is like grade 6, 7, where you're going to start to have some details in the foreground. The background is going to have some more details, and now we'll start having highlights or shines. In this particular picture, I chose the moon as being our light source. So you'll see things to the right and the left of the moon. The highlights have been put onto the side that's facing the moon. Now, I can use yellow because the moon is yellow, so that makes sense to use yellow as a highlight color. But you'll also see that I sometimes use an eraser to kind of lighten up the colors to also make a shine on it. So you can do it with a color, a neighboring color that's lighter in value, or you can use white, or you can erase out the material that's underneath. So that's another way to do it. So this will add another layer of richness to what it is that you're seeing in the image, and this is what I'm expecting in artwork from all high school students. So we got these more details going on in the background. We've got some color in the highlights, color in the shadows. These are things that I'm expecting for a finished work of art. For grade 8 and 9, then we're going to see another step up with this idea of even contrasting colors in those shadows for richness. So if something is blue and you want to use a contrasting color, which would be orange, the opposite side of the color wheel from that, you could put orange in the shadows of a blue object. And this will look more natural than using just a darker shade of blue. So a darker shade will certainly work. A dark cool color will certainly work, but it will add a sense of richness, and it shows me that you're thinking when you use a contrasting color in the shadows. That would be a learned technique. That's not something any kindergartner would do on purpose. So using contrasting colors in the shadows, sometimes in the highlights, but mainly in the shadows, you're going to see a little bit of that step up in the quality of what it is that we're kind of creating here. So it adds this sense of richness, and then adding in more textures. So you'll see some texture in the tree going on in there, a little texture on the alien face. So paying attention to the textures of objects in the grass, that you have a more rugged texture up front and it gets lighter towards the back. The textures in the foreground should be heavier and bold, and the textures in the background should sort of disappear. So having textures throughout the image, not just in one thing, is another thing that shows me that you're finishing up your work, that it's becoming more sophisticated, that it's showing a better quality. I'm expecting at least this level of work for my high school students to be fully complete and make sure that you get that A. If you want to step it up even beyond that, then students who are at higher level, a little bit more experience, are going to have some line variety going on in their work. So that's something that I'm playing with here in the video. Lines that are thicker tend to appear darker. So I put them on the lines that are away from the moon, so it enhances this idea of shadow. Playing around with lines is something that's a little bit more sophisticated. Maybe you don't have a line and it's just two colors that are meeting each other. That's a more sophisticated choice. It shows me that you're thinking about things as you're creating your artwork. So not everything has to have an outline. Sometimes a lack of an outline shows me that you're thinking a little bit more thoroughly in the decisions you're making aesthetically. Textures will become a little bit more realistic, and you'll hopefully show me some techniques that show me that you are taking what I've taught you, what you've learned, and apply it to the work. So you'll see that there's a little bit of cross-hatching happening in the background. There is some stippling techniques happening in the background. And because these were watercolor pencils, I've used a little bit of water to kind of blend out the sky and the mountains to kind of change the texture that's going on in there. So that again is a more sophisticated sort of choice. That's not a choice that an elementary student would make. They're not there, they wouldn't even think of that, but a high school student with a little bit more experience would know, hey, I can do this, or I can mix certain media together to get a certain quality technique, to blend in a certain way. If you're using oil pastels and you know that you can blend them, some people don't know that you can use things like mineral spirits or paint thinner on oil pastels to push that technique and make it look like oil paint. So a more advanced high school student will show me through their work that they're using techniques that they have learned and are applying to the project. Even if I'm not requiring that you do that shows me you are doing that extra step. That's how we get a grade that exceeds expectations. As you look at your work, that's something you want to do before you grade it is, did I show off a particular skill? Did I show off something that I learned? And did I meet the expectations of the project? When you look at what it is that was assigned to you, did you hit all of those points and did you push yourself a little bit further? Or did you just sort of do it and you want to get out of there? So homebound learning is definitely more challenging because you're not going to have somebody over your shoulder reminding you, you need to do this, you need to do that. But you do have a rubric available to you, and that's kind of our last thing, is make sure that you're reviewing the rubric. I always make sure that my 90% column is kind of my meeting the expectations. If you are choosing to exceed expectations, you have to write down how you exceeded those expectations, and you need to be specific. So if you feel like you did better than what's expected, you write down how you did better. And if you miss things, you can kind of underline it. So in here, for my requirements and depth, there are no real personal connections in this image of an alien. It's cute. So I didn't think about my point of view or my experience as an artist or as a person. So it's lacking that. It doesn't have that depth. Though it's well done and technically proficient, it's missing a personal connection. I even, when you look at this alien kind of head, you might be reminded of Toy Story and those aliens with the three little eyeballs on top. So there's something a little derivative of that. And that would, again, kind of diminish the grade. It isn't the whole grade, but it is something to kind of consider. Putting yourself into your work and expressing something personal, whether it's a point of view, the way you think about something, or a theme that you're going to be taking on to make your work original, becomes important to about 20% of the grade. So before you turn something in, make sure you're reviewing this video, reviewing your rubric, and making sure your work is the best that it can be, because unfortunately, I'm not going to be there with you to tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, you got to do this or that. In our online meetings, you can certainly share your work and ask some questions, and I will give you some feedback. But it's important that, in this process that you do what you can on your own.